Hey, hey everybody, welcome to the September Spark session. This month is going to be fantastic. It's one of my favorite topics. And joining me today is Kevin Kerr of arrowhead3consulting.com, just in case you want to know how to find him. And he's going to talk to us about a topic that is near and dear to my heart. I think they're all near and dear to my heart, of course, but this one is the one where you have given a speech. You are taking feedback and questions, and somebody comes at you with an objection that makes all the blood flow out of your face and makes you terrified. So we're going to talk about how to prepare for that situation, because being prepared in advance is the only way to handle that. Although he will also give you some tips on how to reframe objections that come your way that you could probably use on the fly if you're smarter than I am. Anyway, so Kevin Kerr is joining us. I do want to also mention next month's Spark session is on October 19th at 12 Eastern, and the topic will be how to hire an excellent communications director or communications staff. Claire Kittle will be joining us for that one. So put that on your calendars now. And with that, Kevin, why don't we start out by telling those of us who don't already know how awesome you are a little bit about yourself.
Well, I've been working within the Freedom Network for about 5 or 6 years. But years ago, I used to work for a small consulting firm that was very liberal and very progressive, and they asked me to do some work for them at moveon.org. And so I had a good opportunity to see how the other side worked. And we had Van Jones, Ariana Huffington, and about 120 other people. And so I had a really good chance. We did some training for them. And so it's prepared us for how to best help us message against that. And I do a lot of work in the for-profit space with local organizations.
Great. So, just because I don't want to waste anybody's time, let's jump straight in. So tell us why you think we hate objections. Why do you hate objections?
Well, because we take it so personally. We're being rejected ourselves when we get objections. But you always have to realize that an objection really is a gift. And the gift is because it's helping you qualify out. In sales, if you're competing against 5 other organizations, the last place you want to come in is second place. Second place is the worst place to come into. So sometimes an objection helps you weed out whether or not you have the right solution or whether you're talking to the right prospect. And it's really the customers telling us the main thing that's holding me back from buying your product or implementing your policy is such and such. So it really forces us to really understand, do I have the best policy for this problem or this need? But don't be thinking through that at the speech. Make certain you've got that done well beforehand. Otherwise, you're screwed.
Yeah, and I'm having a little video glitch here, Kevin. So if I'm a little behind, I apologize for that. It just had a moment of glitchiness. So friends, if we have awkward pauses, sometimes the internet doesn't keep up with our rhythm here. So okay, so Kevin, what happens if the objection is because the buyer doesn't fully understand the problem? What do you do when that situation happens?
Well, sometimes it's because they see something that you think is positive and they view it as negative, or something that you know is negative, but they're viewing it as positive. So helping them, we call the phrase reframe, looking at it from a different perspective. It's similar to one of the most common objections in the for-profit world is your product is too expensive. Well, of course. So if you look at a product that's very expensive, could you think of any reason that would be more important to focus on rather than just the price? Well, years ago, we were shopping for a heart surgeon for my mother. We were not looking for the cheapest surgeon in Salt Lake City. We were looking for the best one. So in that case, we started to put reliability or outcome and effectiveness over that of price. And that's when you get them to focus on that versus the price, that's making that adjustment, that reframe.
It's funny you bring up that heart one, because when we were shopping for knee surgeons for my brother-in-law, we went to the ski towns of Colorado. because they're working on Olympic knees up there. And the same thing, it was like, it's not so much about the price here. I just want to be able to walk again. And I don't want to necessarily, so that's a good point. That's a good way to reframe something like that. Folks, if you have questions in the middle of the webinar, you can put them in the comment section on Facebook. If I see it, I'll ask it. I have somebody also helping proctor that a little bit. Or if you're viewing this through the Zoom interface, there's a little Q&A button. I think it's at the bottom of your screen, but it might be at the top. And you just put a question in there, and towards the end of this, we will start fielding your questions. But before we do this, Kevin, what does it look like in real life? Okay, you know, like the heart thing makes sense and all that, but what does this look like in real life when an objection has been lobbed at you to reframe it? Can you give us some specific examples?
Yeah, well, let's go back a few years. Those of you that are old enough to remember Heinz ketchup. So some of the gripes that they had about Heinz ketchup was it just took so doggone long to get that ketchup out of the bottle. And so their competitors would say, yeah, that's the ketchup that has the bad bottle and it's too hard to get out. Well, think about it. Heinz could have responded with, okay, well, we'll put more water in our ketchup so it comes out easier. But instead they said, you know what? Yeah, it does take a long time. And what's the benefit of that? The benefit is we have the best tasting ketchup. So then they used Carly Simon's song Anticipation to emphasize that value. And then they would have food pornography where they would show French fries or potatoes, all the things that us Idahoans love, next to ketchup. And then you would hear the song.
Right.
One of my clients, a large German software company, SAP, they had a product that was very complicated. And so Oracle, whenever Oracle or PeopleSoft would go in and fight against them, they would just land the objection, oh, you don't want to work with SAP. They're too complicated. And that would instill fear and doubt in the minds of the customer. And so we trained their salespeople on how to deal with that. And they came up with all kinds of ideas when we worked with them. One of my favorite was they would say, so the person would say, we understand your product is very complicated. The person would then step into it and say, complicated. You know, that's an interesting thing to think about. It is a complicated product. But when you think about flying across the Atlantic, we do it in a Boeing 777 where you have 2 million parts. Very complicated device. Yet for me, the passenger, I get on, buckle up, have my drink, and then unbuckle when we land. But to the pilot, she sits in the cockpit and she has an array of screens that enable her to control that entire aircraft very seamlessly and easily. And then they would land with the phrase, complex problems require complex solutions that are easy to use. Other sales guys would use their own examples. And see, that's the beauty of a reframe. Once you understand the concept, you come up with your own reframe. I mean, Nicole, you have a cell phone. Do you know how your cell phone works? I mean,
this one right here?
Yeah, when you get down to the nuts and bolts of it, do you really know how it works?
No, not really.
Okay, well, but you can use it and you can use it easily. My 96-year-old mother has a cell phone that she texts, but if she were to try and explain it, or my car, I wouldn't have the foggiest idea if I opened the hood how to work on it, but I know how to drive it. So complex problems require complex solutions that are easy to use. They would sometimes say, wrap up with, would you want to fly across the Atlantic in an airplane that only had 100,000 parts? And that was a way of now negatively niching the competition because you really do need to have a complex solution for this complex problem.
Oh my goodness, you're reminding me of the one with two guys in a garage.
Yeah.
Remember that one?
Yeah, I do. So one of the gripes was it was a small organization, just a startup, and people would say, oh, we don't want to work with you guys. We've been told by the big 6 consulting firms that you're just like, I think it was 3 guys in a garage. And then they would say, okay, well, that's interesting. From one guy in a garage came the automobile industry. From 2 guys in a garage came aviation. Now just imagine, what could 3 guys in a garage come out with? And then they would say why it was so important, because they were nimble, they were agile, and they could do all sorts of things. So it was finding out what was their concern and then what's the positive that they're overlooking. Now let's focus on the positive.
Okay, well, cool. Okay, I see how this works with products. Like, you know, your examples are about software or computers. What products you might buy? It seems like a very tangible thing. In our world, we're often grappling with complex concepts in the policy world, right? So how does this apply to public policy?
It applies very well. In fact, that's one of the toughest things with policy is we tend to view it abstractly, and we have a hard time really zeroing in on what are the core concepts. But the other side does a great job of zeroing in on just the core concepts, especially the objections. I remember we were working with a group on ESAs or school choice, and the concern was, and they came up with some great reframes. So Nicole, are you okay if I read this? Because I want to use the exact wording that the person came up with.
Yeah, I think that's fine.
Okay, so the objection was, can you imagine this as an objection? Well, we don't want to do ESAs because that's going to take money out of public schools. Okay, you've heard that one before. And then I love the response. Isn't it sad that when people talk about education, people are talking about funding school buildings rather than educating children? And they then talk about the importance of having the parent choose what is best for the child, not the school. And who would you rather determine your education for your child, a school or somebody in Washington, or the parents or you? And I love this example that they use after that. What if we applied the same logic to Medicaid? Would we limit a veteran to one doctor or hospital? And if they did choose to go to another hospital or doctor, is that money going to be taken out of healthcare? No, it's simply being controlled by the patient who knows what is best for them, and they go where they get the best for their money. The public education should not be any different. And then they support it with lots of proofs about how this is working in Arizona and Florida. They cite research about when the parents choose, the outcomes are better.
Wow, that's neat. That makes it pretty clear. Can you give us another example?
Yeah, we did a boot camp on jobs a little while ago, and I loved what that group came up with. So let's say if you look at, you're looking to expand jobs in your state, think of all the different policies that you would want to do something like that. And one of the ones that they would use was regulation reform. And whenever regulation reform would come up, one of the objections that would come up would be, but we need to provide a safety net, and your policy is going to destroy that if you get rid of regulations or change them so much. And of course, there's a need for a safety net. So they would say, we need a safety net for people in need. But right now, that safety net is being abused and weakened, so it won't be able to help those in need. And then I love how they wrap it up with this story chain at the end. But an even better safety net is when any unemployed person can sell food out of their home, earn money by driving their own car, or make money with their skills, not being blocked with permits, regulations, and barriers. We want to give people an opportunity to come off the safety net and stand on their own 2 feet. And then they would sometimes say the best safety net is when people have a job with money coming in. And one of the things that they did really well whenever we work with these groups in these boot camps is we teach them, land on your arrowhead, land on your key point that sets you apart. And that's very powerful.
Yeah, I think it's important to note that some of these examples have come out of boot camps where, you know, groups of 12 to 14 people are trying different reframes out until they find the one that is simple and makes the most sense. And with that, do you have any way to explain how does the reframe work? Because I see how those examples are cool, but how do you develop a reframe? How does it work?
Well, that's a good point. If you sat in a room all by yourself trying to come up with reframes, you're gonna have a really tough time. The best way to do it is in a brainstorming session. And if you need to know exactly how to do it. And that's why in these boot camps, we find so much success with it, because we put all the objections out on the table, and then we assign them out, and then we brainstorm together. So let's say, for example, you're a Western state, and you have lots of federal land that you don't have access to, and your policy is you want to free up that federal land and give it back to the state. But people in your state are objecting, and they're saying, oh, you just want to do that so you can mine it, so that you can drill it. This land needs to be preserved. Okay. So when you analyze it, so in a group, we would say, okay, what's the core objection? And they would say, well, it needs to be preserved, otherwise it's going to be destroyed. So now you take this concept of preserved, and you start thinking, okay, is there anything that can leapfrog the concept of preservation? So we would brainstorm as a group. We would start getting ideas such as control, local rights, stewardship, and we try and land, and then they landed on this concept of tending. And I love what they did. They then made this metaphor of a museum versus a garden. You go into a museum where everything is preserved, what do you see? You see signs that say, hands off, don't touch. And everything's dead, and it even smells funny, at least most of the museums that I go to. But then, when you go to a garden, things are being tended. They're being taken care of. You choose what you want to plant. You're never going to put your weed killer next to your tomatoes that you're going to eat. You're going to be very careful so that that garden can sustain itself and give you fresh fruit, look good year after year. And federal lands are the exact same way. Who better to control and tend this land and take care of the resources than the people that are closest to it, not people that are very far away. These states are very smart. They have environmental laws. They're not going to drill a mine right next to a very powerful or very important resource. And so that concept of moving from preservation to tending, the tending leapfrogs that preservation concept, and they have a great metaphor, and then they can support it with proof. And this is, I know Utah, they had a similar situation with federal lands where they had a real nasty situation a year or so ago, and they used some of these same concepts to have it work. And what was interesting, Nicole, is, do you remember what happened there? The opposition, they brought in Native Americans from all over the country to talk about, you need to preserve this land. And what did the Sutherland Institute do? They went down there and they found the Native Americans from that area and talked to them. And they said, well, we want this land. And they use essentially the same logic of a garden. This is ours to take care of. And then they would say, talk to all the Native Americans from the other side, ask them where they're from. You'll find they're from everywhere else. But us, the people that live here, that's our resource. We want to tend it like a garden. And they were able to make some substantial turnovers with that.
Well, that sounds pretty cool. So any tips on how to deliver an objection reframe?
Ooh, good question. Okay, guys, when you get an objection, don't do this. All right, Nicole, hit me with an objection. So hang on. All right, so I just finished my speech. So what do you think?
Well, we need to preserve the forests, and your way is not going to preserve them.
Okay, don't do this, guys. Well, you know, preserving the forest is an important thing, okay? Don't walk away from it. Okay, hit me with another objection, Nicole. Here's another thing not to do. So what do you think?
Well, I think we need to preserve the forest, and giving it back to the states would not do that. They'll just mine it.
So you're telling me that we should preserve the forest and not mine it? Okay, is that what you're telling me? Huh? Well, are you? Okay. Don't do that. You're getting right into their space. The right thing to do is when you get that objection, just take a subtle step forward. That shows you're confident. And then address it with your reframe. What happens if you're on a panel discussion? You're sitting in a chair. You've got typically have a table in front of you, and somebody hits you with an objection. Just lean forward. When you're asking questions and you think you're getting an objection, don't be sitting forward like this, because the only place for you to go is backward. Your body language speaks volumes. So make certain you lean into it. And if you're on an audio call, sometimes the best thing to do is when you get an objection is to stand up. Your voice, the diaphragm will change and your voice will be more commanding.
That makes sense. I feel like we also usually know what objections are going to be thrown at us. And I mean, if there's one that's particularly tricky, I mean, what should I do?
Okay, so let's say you've got a reframe that's so good that you're just begging, oh, come on, ask me this objection. I want to give it. I'm praying to give it. Well, one thing you could do in your presentation, you could say, I know there's some people out there that may be saying that this forest needs to be preserved. Otherwise, we're going to drill it and mine it. And then you deliver your reframe that way. The person who's going to go right after you, you've just disarmed them from much of what they were going to say because you knew that that was going to be one of their main points. Well, you just obliterated it with the garden. They'll try and figure out a way to leapfrog your garden analogy with preservation, and that's going to be hard for them to do, especially on the fly. So build it in, destroy them at the beginning, or better yet, right towards the end when they have no time to prepare.
Now, remember when we were working with Robert Alt from the Buckeye Institute to do with objections?
I love his tips. So guys, those of you that don't know Robert Alt, he's the president of the Buckeye Institute. He used to train attorneys that would argue in front of the Supreme Court. And one of the things that he would teach the attorneys to do when they would get an objection, he would say, and that exactly proves my point. And then they would go on to explain why. But that very concept, the fact that you were strong enough to be able to say, and that exactly proves my point, gave the other side, even if the people listening didn't understand what you were saying, they knew you were emphatic and that you believed in what you were saying very strongly.
Okay, so I mean, back to the forest one. So you've reframed preservation as tending a garden and growing abundance, right? Those are two very different concepts. The museums I go to, by the way, often have dead animals preserved, but that's just me. Isn't that just spin? How is that not spin?
No, let me tell you about spin. A reframe, Nicole, is blatantly honest. You're being so honest there because you're saying, look at this, and if you don't have anything positive to reframe to, that should be a good indication to you that your policy isn't the right policy. I won't say who the group was because you'll know who you are if I say it, but I remember working with a group and they were working on an objection and the reframe that they had for the objection was really weak. Nicole, do you remember which one I'm talking about?
Yep.
And they realized, it was fun to hear them say, wow, I didn't realize it was that weak. Maybe we need to adjust our policy. They did. So a reframe will help you unmask when your policy is not strong. What spin is the Wizard of Oz saying, pay no attention to that man behind the curtain. It's a sleight of hand. Don't look over here where we have issues. Look over here. What you're doing is you're addressing their concerns and you're explaining why their concerns should not matter. In fact, many times why their concerns should be a confirmation of why they want your product. So the key, Nicole, is that reframes will not work for every objection.
Okay.
So work through it beforehand, and sometimes the objection should tell you that you need to address something in your policy or your product.
I'm hearing you tell me sometimes an apple is simply an apple.
Yeah. So if let's say I sell software, and I sell software for the Apple Macintosh, okay, or the Apple platform, and the person says, but you don't run on Windows. I can't reframe that. I just have to say, you know what? I don't have a solution for you. Let's check back in another 6 months or a year, and I might have a solution for you. Don't reframe that one. That's just telling you you don't have a solution for them. Don't waste your money trying to win that one. That would be a bad deal.
Okay, so back to the process of creating a reframe. If you were going to break it down into a couple of steps, like what would the process be?
Okay, well, can I share an example of one I saw in a commercial in Israel last week?
Of course.
Okay, because they had it broken down very well. I wasn't in Israel, but I saw this commercial that Gillette, the shaving company, that they were playing in Israel. It was a social media commercial, so it was about 3 minutes long. And what they did is they took 9 men, all with beards, okay, young guys with beards that loved their beards. Now think about, how would a shaving company, why would they sit down with a bunch of guys with beards that love their beards? Well, the other thing that these guys had in common is they were just about to become new dads for the very first time. So they then asked some questions, and the questions that they asked help unmask the process that a reframe goes through. The first question was, understand you're having a baby here soon. When's it going to happen? Oh, it could be tonight. It could be this week or sometime. And are you looking forward to it? Oh, yeah. What changes have you made in your life? Oh, we've redone the room. We've painted it pink. We painted it blue. And I can't do my PlayStation anymore. And then they would say, what other changes are you going to have to make in your life? And they would tell more things like that. And then they would ask the odd question, what about your beard? And they would look confused. What do you mean, what about my beard? And they would say, why do you have a beard? And I love the one guy saying, my beard, I'm Samson, I'm powerful when I have my beard. Another guy would talk about how important his beard was to him, to his identity of looking older, not looking like a young child. And then they would say, would you shave off your beard? And they would say, no. Then they gave some interesting statistics. The first one they said was, your child, the only way a baby communicates is through language and through touch. And then they said, another statistic, they said that your child will learn trust mainly through your skin-to-skin contact. And then they handed each one of them a piece of paper. And on the piece of paper, it had 5 little boxes, each one with a different grid of sandpaper. And so one was rough that said, 5 o'clock shadow, or this one is a 3-day or a very advanced growth beard. And then they would say, which of these boxes, what would your beard feel like to your baby? And responses were things like porcupine, cactus. And now they started to realize what the beard was. The beard was a symbol of their manhood, but now it's being threatened because it's becoming an obstacle between they and their child. And then they asked the question, would you shave your beard for your child? And they said, yeah. And they handed them a razor right then and there. And then the commercial showed them using the Gillette and then the foam and everything. And then the last picture was touching. It would show, a few days later, there they are with that little baby, and little baby just nuzzling against the dad's baby face. And, to me, that is a great example because they address the main concern. So in looking at an objection, you find out what's the main concern. You want to understand what their fear is, their concern. You get that locked down. Okay, they feel like it needs to be preserved. And then you ask yourself, is there anything, what is the truth? Is preserving the land the best thing? Well, no, because when we leave forests all by themselves, trees that grow up all over the place and they don't have the proper spacing, and reindeer get stuck between trees when there's a forest fire, and nasty things like that. So then you ask yourself, what is positive for me in that objection? Is there anything positive for me? So I say, looking at that preservation, I can then say, you know what, controlling it locally is more important. And what's the benefit of that? Well, I take care of it. I know more about it than anybody else. And then here's another key. When people have objections, they're normally rooted in emotion. So if you just come in and start telling people, no, that's not the concern, you shouldn't be concerned about preservation, they're going to push back. So what a reframe does is it's an aikido, martial arts type of move. You're taking that energy and you're slightly shifting it off to another direction, and you find an analogy outside the policy world. Because people can agree what a museum is like. They can agree what a garden's like. And once they agree there, it's then much easier to say, and my policy is just like that. And it's less of an emotional shift for them and more comfortable. And then if you support it with proof, a short story, or maybe some research or data, you're bulletproof at that point.
Well, that sounds interesting to me. What are, how do you really hone it? What's the method? Because, okay, so you hear an objection reframe, and And I'm thinking of a couple of other ones we've developed over the years, but how's the best way to get good at delivering it, would you say?
Well, I like what we do in our boot camps. We do a thing called murder boarding. And those of you that have policy teams, this is something you might want to try and do. And in the murder board, what we'll do is we'll take 3 people that are going to be faced with this objection. And so the objection might be, you're taking money out of the schools. So then person A then addresses that concern, and they do it live. It's a role play right in front of everybody. We'll sometimes videotape it so that we can capture it later. We never put those on YouTube, although it would be fun to watch some of them.
No.
And after that person delivers that reframe for about a minute or less, then we'll ask the group, so what did you think? What worked? What didn't work? And then lots of ideas will come up. And then we'll do the same objection to person number 2. Now they get to benefit from all that advice. Now they deliver that with their own flavor. And then again, the coaching, what did you think? What worked? What didn't? And then more ideas. And then person number 3. If everything goes well, that person number 3 should knock it out of the park. They should do it very well. The key is to find out what did they do and go and practice it. Then we'll take another objection, and if it's these same 3 people that we're trying to prepare to get to murder board them and prepare them for testimony or whatever, we'll now start with person 2 with the next objection. But when those people walk out, they have been murder boarded and they're very prepared to answer those objections. But the same guy that trained Reagan in some of his communications told that everybody should be ready to address the 5 toughest objections you're going to get. Don't practice this for the first time in front of your client. Make certain you've practiced it many times, especially in your teams or at a boot camp, so you feel more confident delivering it.
Oh, I remember once you asked Taryn Bragdon how many minutes he practices before he delivers something to a client. Do you remember what that number was? For every minute he presents to a client, there's another number of minutes he prepares.
So those of you that know Taryn with the Foundation for Government Accountability, very good communicator. He's wonderful to watch, but he will practice typically 16 to 20 minutes for every minute that he's going to be communicating. So you just think about that. If you're going to be speaking for an hour or a half hour, now times that by 16, that's how much time he practiced delivering. That's why his delivery is so polished and so good.
Yeah. So it behooves him to deliver the same thing more than once, doesn't it?
Yes. Yeah.
Or he doesn't sleep. We've just learned that Taryn Bragdon does not sleep today on the Spark session, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so you keep talking about these boot camps, and I'm sure people watching this are wondering, hey, if I wanted to go to a boot camp, how would I get that done? And or how can I continue to develop this skill? And this is your last question, Kevin, and then I'm going to start taking questions from the audience. So go for it. So how do people get involved in boot camps?
Well, I've been blessed to be able to do, let's see, Nicole, I've done 46 different arrowheads in the freedom movement on 26 different topics. And it's, when we bring together these things, they're bloodbaths, but we walk out with a cool message, and I hear from the smartest people. So it's enabled me to see what the best messaging, the best stories are. And so we've captured all of that in these story quivers. And we're now trying to find a way, how do we get this out to the movement? And so these boot camps we want to do is to pick the topic that's important to a group, and people can say, I need to send 3 or 4 people to it, and then we can deliver it, they practice it, and they go away certified, if you will, on that particular policy. So I think if somebody wants to do something like that, reaching out to either to me or to you, and once we have a quorum or a group of people, we can then prepare that. We're going to be preparing some in the near future, but if somebody has one that's really important to them, it might be pension reform, it might be regulation reform, or it might be licensing or something like that, or donor privacy. These are things we've all done arrowheads on, and we can help boot camp you and get you ready, murder board you, and prepare you for it.
Sounds good. And I'm pretty sure there will be some regional ones coming up in the next 12 months. So do keep your eye on your email inbox if you're on our email list. You know what? In the replay episode, I will also set up a form for if folks are interested in boot camps on a specific topic, just, sign up. And then if we have one come out, we can just announce to you so that if you're interested in attending, you can. Okay, so I am not seeing a lot of questions here. So I'm going to give it about 30 more seconds, Kevin. And if we don't get questions, we'll wrap up for the day. While we're doing that, how do people email you if they want to email you?
Just my email, which is Kevin, Kevan, at arrowhead3.com. So arrowhead, the number 3.com. And Nicole, like you said, you could list out some of the topics that we've done. I would really appreciate to know which ones would be most important for them. What battles are they looking to fight so we can help prepare you for them?
Yeah. Dare I say we'd be willing to try one on a digital training course?
Yep.
It won't be the same as a live murder board, though, but we can murder board people on Zoom. That would not be streaming live on Facebook, though. That would be something that only the attendees get to see. But that's something I've been wanting to play with a little bit, too. So for the people who can't easily fly to wherever the Reframe will be. And folks, if you want to reach me, it's Nicole, and Cole at sparkfreedom.org. Kevin, one more thing before we wind up, because we were working with the Mackinac Center this summer on the corporate welfare topic. And Michael Wrights came up with a really good reframe. Can you tell us about that one? Because it's one of my favorites.
Yeah. So we typically go into the Mackinac Center every couple of years, and they pick a hot policy that's important to them. And it's a refresh on all the Arrowhead tools and concepts for them. And so this time it was corporate welfare, or what I like to call corporate handouts. And one of the objections, typically by a legislator, okay, so they have these economic development committees, and the policy is you shouldn't be doing this, okay? You should make it fair for everybody. Well, one of the responses is, you guys from Mackinac, you're all about theory, you're all about ideas and philosophy. And so here's what Mike Wrights came up with. I love it. So the objection is, Mike, you guys at Mackinac, you're all philosophy and theory. And Mike responds with, yes, it's called the American Dream, a philosophy that has worked over the last 250 years to lift people out of poverty. What philosophy is your idea based on? It sounds like your philosophy, and then here's where they give the arrowhead, the negative and positive. Your philosophy is where favored corporations matter more to lawmakers than their residents, where money for the public good is taken and given to these few corporations, where our communities are now more dangerous and poor, and where it doesn't create jobs, but it takes jobs from everyone else. But my philosophy of the American Dreams means that residents matter more to lawmakers than a few favored corporation. It means that everyone pays their fair share for public services, and it means our communities are more prosperous and safe, and it means that every business is free to create jobs and grow the economy together. Man, powerful.
Yeah, he nailed that one. And he did it, and there was like a flag behind him.
Yeah, I heard God Bless America, and it was wonderful.
Yeah, okay, so to wrap this all up, the process is really when you get an objection, rather than responding to that objection, identify the core concern, because often the words that they say to you are not the core concern. We hear that a lot. And then look at that core concern, decide if it's a true concern or not. If it is a concern, but there's something good in it and good in your solution that addresses that, talk about what's good. Talk about the highlight of that. And the example there is, garden versus preservation, like a museum. Find a simple way to explain that that's like a metaphor or something. It's something outside of the space that it's almost the same as this thing, and then land on a proof point. Is that basically what we're doing here?
Land on your proof point and your arrowhead, your key point. And yeah, that's where the wonky stuff comes in, because we need the wonky stuff. Practice. Yeah, keep practicing, because
and if you know the objections in advance, it's totally worth it, I think, to get your brainstorming people together and come up with, what would you say, top 3, top 4 objections, be able to reframe those?
Yeah, top 5, do 5.
Top 5. Okay, Kevin, thank you so much for giving us your time
Thanks,
today.
Nicole.
It was really comprehensive. I got a couple comments saying it was so comprehensive that they didn't have questions. So thanks everybody for tuning in. Again, next month it will be October 19, Thursday at 12 Eastern, and we'll be talking about how to hire awesome communications talent, something we could all use, right? Okay, talk to you later, everybody. Goodbye, Kevin.
Thanks, Nicole. Take care, everybody.